It's 2025, a new year and the best time to turn your great idea into a business. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts. Established in 2025. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/promo.
Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the political podcast embodiment of Carry On, Don't Lose Your Head. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith, the Barbara Windsor, to Alex's Kenneth Williams.
And I'm producer Kenny, doubling up as Sid James and Hattie Jakes so I can keep costs down and dress up as an matron.
Matron. Our philosophy is simple, to explore things with you rather than talk at you.
So breathe out the cynicism, breathe in some optimism, get comfy, and let's start another Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi.
On this week's Quiet Riot, we analyse everything Brussels and the UK-EU reset before venturing into the latest mad ramblings of Trump on Gaza, the rise of racism and antisemitism across the world, peppered with our regular features designed to make you laugh in despair or cheer you up with glee.
And to help us with all of that, we are very excited to welcome the writer, commentator and all-round brain, Rachel Shabi. Welcome, Rachel.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me on. It's nice to be with you.
Rachel, I remember reading a joyous piece you wrote about borrowing a dog to walk. Barney, he was called.
Yeah.
And what huge effect that had on your well-being. And next I knew, there was another pooch in the mix, Arlo. So this was a couple of years ago. So can I first check on the number of dogs you now walk?
Well, before I address that, can I just say how delighted I am that you want to talk about this, because I basically will crowbar this into any conversation anyway. So you've stopped me from doing that. There's one now because Barney is no longer in London and is on the way to becoming an American dog.
Barney, why'd you do that?
I know. I really miss him. Aww. I still have Arlo, who I walk every week. But I guess the thing is that I had no idea before I started hanging out with these dogs what a relationship and what a bond you could form with these creatures in a sort of non-verbal interspecies way. They're such incredible creatures.
So you never had a dog growing up?
Never had a dog growing up.
Amazing.
Well, the thing is, I was allergic to cats. And also my dad was a bit of a let the animals be free kind of socialist, right? But my mum, as I discovered when I started walking these dogs, my mum had a dog in northern Iraq, in Kirkuk, which I was like, wait, what? My mum and I now chat regularly about the dogs that I walk, and sometimes I take them to see her. So that's like another sort of tangent.
Isn't it weird when you discover at this age stuff about your parents that you actually didn't know?
I sort of kind of knew that she had a dog in Kirkuk, but I didn't expect her to be talking so verbosely at this stage about it still. Like, that's how strong the connection is.
That's so brilliant. When my mum got Alzheimer's and her inhibitions started dropping, one of the first things she revealed is that for 45 years, she voted for the Communist Party to spite my father, who was a Conservative.
Nice. Respect the mum.
The first filter to go.
Yeah.
Quiet It's been a busy week for both me and the Prime Minister because we both have been enjoying the best of Brussels as the fabled UK-EU reset has taken an important, albeit rhetorical step in the right direction. We were at different events, I hasten to add. Before the meeting between Starmer and his European counterparts, Trump, of course, reaffirmed his commitment to enact tariffs on EU goods.
Well, in theory.
Who knows? In, out, shake it all about. And he began another bizarre tirade on the bloc. The PM delicately sidestepped the issue throughout his time in Belgium, arguing that we wouldn't have to choose between our allies. And listeners, you will have heard me say this before, while he is correct, we do not need to choose between trading partners. We simply must prioritise the one that gets us the most growth, the fastest, and of course that is the EU. And what did I hear in Brussels? Well, in their view, the reset is now complete in the eyes of many of them, because for them, the needed reset was one of tone. And the UK government has improved markedly that relationship since Labour took power. And what they want now is detail. The reset on the tone is done. We can now begin to flesh out the actual detail of what our relationship should look like. Starmer is the first PM since Brexit to meet with all 27 EU heads of state at the picturesque Palais d'Egmont in Brussels. And leading the agenda was the hot and salient topic of defence and security, particularly so because we are now approaching the third anniversary of the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It wasn't just Starmer over in Brussels this week. It was also his lead minister on all things EU, Nick Thomas-Symonds, who met his EU counterpart, Vice President of the Commission, Maros Šefčovič. Let's have a little listen.
The European Union is the UK's biggest trading partner, with trade totalling in 2023 over £800 billion. Many of our best education and science facilities have lifelong links. And our collaboration on research and development has been a springboard for hugely successful innovations that have driven growth and jobs. And in a more uncertain world, we are regularly reminded that allies are more secure together than they are apart.
The net result, it seems positive. A briefing from Nick Thomas-Symonds described the talks as productive and Šefčovič's team prompt for meaningful. And we also now know...
Literally meaningless.
the date of the long-awaited big summit. And the big summit is the von der Leyen-Starmer summit, and that is now being penciled in for the 19th of May. Both of you, it feels to me like Brits often look to Europe on trade, but to the US on security. Is it possible for the EU and the UK to trust the US over matters of security, intelligence sharing, etc., given all of the threat around tariffs being made? And let's not forget the entrance of people like Musk and even bloody Tulsi Gabbard into all of this. Are we sort of fundamentally seeing a shift potentially away from most trusted ally on security being the US?
I mean, let's see if Tulsi Gabbard will get confirmed. The signs at the moment is that she probably will, because one of the senators that was sceptical about her has fallen into line. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how the Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth pics 2-3 months ago were being discussed as a sort of joke opening bid that obviously Trump was going to move from. But it seems they were a different sort of creature altogether. They were a loyalty test. They were a crime syndicate boss's loyalty test, effectively, to see whether he can get Congress to do whatever he fucking wants by choosing the most inappropriate people for the most inappropriate jobs. I speak to people in the intelligence community, and what they tell me is that they may not trust the highest levels of an administration, but that the intelligence sharing happens at a lower level, and they trust their colleagues in the intelligence services. So it's more of a risk that you will have what you think is a private conversation as prime minister with Trump, and then he'll tweet about it, than it is that you will share something sensitive with a contact at the CIA and they will somehow publicize it. But, I mean, who knows? We are genuinely through the looking glass and in uncharted territory. We really are.
Obviously, I'm here at NATO today, making the clear case and having the discussions about defence and security. And tonight I'll be at the EU Council. Now, tonight is very much obviously about security and defence, where I do think there's a very important discussion to be had about how we increase our security and defence work together in a very volatile world. But also, I will touch on the wider reset, which goes beyond defence and security, into the fields of energy and into trade and the economy. And so back to where I started, really, both of these relations are very important to us. We are not choosing between them, but that's historically been the position of the UK for many, many decades now.
Rachel, the UK-EU reset doesn't mean anything in Brussels beyond the tone change, but let's call it the improvement of the trading relationship between the two. What do you think the EU will want from the UK from that? Because the deal at the moment is absolutely shit for Britain, which means it's really quite good for the EU. So entering into this phase of maybe relooking at that, what do you think it is that they're going to be wanting from the UK in order to give us anything in return?
I guess we can already see some signs of what they want from the sort of things that they flouted in the past. So things like, they've talked about re-establishing freedom of movement for young people, for instance, which frankly is net gain for everyone.
A youth mobility scheme, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, we can see the sort of things that they're interested in. It's a particularly foolish position for the UK to have found itself, isn't it? Outside the EU bloc, but with a Trump presidency and Trump 2.0 and this launch of tariff wars, even just with not following through, even like we're going to have this, we're going to have these, but we're going to pause them for a month and maybe we won't do them at all and maybe Trump will forget. But the fact that they are talking about it and also threatening the EU, the only way really to stand up to that is collectively.
Yes.
And the UK finds itself outside the large European collective bloc is particularly unfortunate. So how Labour's going to square that, I don't know, but they're going to have to find a way.
The optimistic version of that, which some of the people were airing to the European Affairs Committee a couple of days ago, was that maybe there is an opportunity for the UK to act as a sort of bridge, that Trump, in all his tariff madness, he's also looking for the positive paradigm. So he's looking for people to punish, but he's also looking for a country that he can reward to show the others what happens. It has to be said that his rhetoric on Starmer has been different to pretty much everyone else. And so maybe the UK is weirdly manoeuvring itself in that position, and maybe there's a kind of Goldilocks deal there to be done. Because we are in the strange position of having loads of goods trade with Europe, but loads of services trade with the rest of the world. And so some people are making a noise that maybe there is a narrow space there to improve the deal with the EU massively on goods and do quite a good deal with Washington on services. To be walking that kind of tightrope with someone as crazy and bullyish as Trump seems to me an impossible exercise, but...
Yeah, I think a few things. One, disaggregating goods and services in the 21st century is almost impossible. There are very few goods that are not sold with a service attached to them, whether it is a warranty, whether it is a finance deal, whether it is a customer service element to it. So the Goldilocks thing sort of sounds great if you're trying to sound clever at a select committee. I think in reality, it is incredibly dangerous because of that interconnectedness. And
burn select committee.
And when you're talking to Europe while showing plenty of ankle to Trump, in particular Trump, but the US in general, I think your ability to progress things with Europe will be highly constrained. A, because there isn't a huge amount of incentive for them to improve the existing deal anyway. That incentive might come in the form of tariffs from Trump.
It will definitely happen with the European Union, I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. And You know, we have over a $300 billion deficit. They don't take our cars. They don't take our farm products. They take almost nothing. And we take everything from them. Millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products. So the European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
And that could actually be the single best thing that could happen to the negotiating team on the UK side, because all of a sudden the UK is bringing something to the table which is acting as a bit of a shield because of the exposure on services that the UK economy offers. So maybe that. What the EU will not countenance is low quality, high risk products entering the single market through the UK from America. Now,
I mean, no one is saying that will happen.
But if the UK is sort of bobbing around mid-Atlantic saying we can have a little bit here and a little bit there, I think the message from Brussels will be no.
Absolutely
if you want them,
not.
off you pop, and you do whatever you want to do with them and come back to us at a later stage. But as it is, we're sticking with the deal that we've signed and gotten agreed to because that is high risk to us, which is all about the prioritisation point. Like, sort out the deal with your largest trading partner first and then consider what else might be possible elsewhere around the world. What I will say, though, is when we think about where the great British public are on all of this, while they hugely support prioritising the deal with Europe over the US and China and Brazil and any other bloc of countries we might want to be doing work with, they don't like the idea of us not being able to do agreements with the rest of the world. So the support for the EU is very much there, but not if it comes at the expense of being able to do deals with other countries. And that is the attack line that Reform and Melanie Phillips in the Times and whoever else on the Eurosceptic wing of British politics will attack them. They'll try and claim that, Starmer's trying to tie us to the EU so that we can never do a deal with anyone else. Well, look, Canada and the EU signed CETA, and if you're telling me that Canada doesn't do trade deals with other countries, then you're for the birds. But that's the line.
It was fascinating to hear Nigel Farage on the Today programme earlier in the week, because he really did struggle on the specifics.
Yeah.
He was asked basically, does he think the current deal is good? And he said, no, it's a terrible deal. So we should be trying to improve it. Yes. How do we improve it? And on that, he had nothing. He just kept saying, we of course, we can be friendly with Europe. He kept repeating, we can be friendly. And basically, he was told by Emma Barnett, we're not mates in the pub. If you're talking about improving a trade deal, it has to come with some detail of what area can we improve it in. His response ended up, I think we should be doing a deal with the United States. As if there is a deal on the table. There isn't. That notion of dangling a deal with the United States was one of the planks of the Brexit campaign. And it then didn't materialize because the US, and this is nothing to do with Trump, the US for several decades now have had a no comprehensive FTAs with anyone policy. They ain't going to change it now.
Quiet Riot. This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code SPOTIFY. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code SPOTIFY.
Quiet Riot. Rachel, while we're on Reform, I want to talk to you about what we heard a few hours before we recorded the show, was that about 90 Labour MPs are forming an anti-immigration caucus, or words to that effect, because they fear Reform in a close second place in their seats. Their push this morning was to say to Labour leadership, we need you to talk more about what you're doing to tackle immigration. How do you sort of respond to that? I mean, can Labour ever out-reform on immigration?
Obviously not. It's the dumbest triangulation that Labour keeps on repeating and, has done historically for decades. Blair-era governments were classics in the genre of triangulating and appearing to be and actually passing laws that were hostile to refugees and asylum seekers in particular. Obviously not. If you're the sort of person that likes to see refugees and asylum seekers treated harshly, you're going to go for the full fat version, right? Yeah. The thing about this is that at some point we do have to recognise and accept, and it's actually quite a liberation to do so, that a bunch of Labour MPs are not doing this because they're fearing the political consequences. It's not, oh, we have to be harsh. We don't want to be harsher on immigration, but we have to be because otherwise we'll lose the election. They are doing it because that is who they are. That is what their ideology is. That's not going to change, and it is impervious to political fortunes. Why can we say this with certainty? Because look at polling from YouGov, polling that shows Reform doing great, and in particular not stealing, it's not a heist, taking Labour voters. We're in the poll of what makes you dissatisfied with Labour. What are number 1, 2, and 3? Number 1, the fuel tax, like not doing anything to mitigate the impact of fuel bills, soaring fuel bills on the poorest. Number 2, treating pensioners badly. Number 3, breaking their promises repeatedly, saying something and then doing something else. All of these things are things that the Labour Party could fix if it wanted to, if it wasn't ideologically wedded to a sort of Labour right. But crucially, none of those things have anything to do with immigration. So this idea, let's just call it what it is. This is Labour MPs telling us who they are, and we need to respond to that accordingly.
And so on the other flank, do they need to be more concerned about the Lib Dems and their pro-Europeanism, or the Green Party in terms of out-lefting them on several issues, environment, refugees, you name it?
I think that that's a more interesting flank, and I certainly would like to see the Labour left, as well as the independent MPs, as well as the Green MPs, actually step up much more to that task. And I do think there's a wider narrative here, which is, when we talk about Europe and when the EU, the reset, and also when we talk about, what Trump is signalling with the tariffs, what these people are signalling, like it or not, what the far right are signalling is economic discontent. Right? That's what they're tapping into. When Trump is talking about tariffs, he's tapping into the idea that people see multinationals do what they like, move their money and the resources wherever they like, utilize whatever labor force they like, and then cream all the profits and offshore them somewhere, right? That's the sentiment.
In part it's that, but there is also the concept of foreignness in there. When it comes
absolutely.
to tariffs, it's not just any companies, it's foreign companies.
I'm not denying that for a second. What I'm saying is that he's speaking to an economic discontent there. Mm-hmm. Notice that he talks about fentanyl. Why? Mm-hmm. Because his vote base has a huge, the opioid crisis in America is horrendous and afflicting so many lives. It's got very little to do with where the drugs are coming from, and much more to do with an entire system from healthcare to pharma companies that have catastrophically let people down, primarily in the Rust Belt areas that vote for Trump. Yeah. So signaling these things is saying meaningful things to his base in the same way that Reform, etc., are saying meaningful things to their base. I'm not saying that they're not attractive to racists. They absolutely are. But there's a whole economic layer there that isn't actually going to be addressed by talk of an EU reset or talk of accommodating Trump's tariffs or not. It's a much bigger story of if you're going to grow the economy but not actually trickle it down, then what are you doing? You might as well roll out the red carpet to the far right.
Let's listen to what Zach Pulaski said this week. It's precisely what you're talking about.
It's a story I'm hearing over and over again. I used to vote for the Labour Party, but the party has left me. And look, we don't have time to mess around. There's a genocide in Gaza. There were literally racist riots on our streets last summer, and reform on the rise. And what are this government doing? They're cutting winter fuel payments for our grandparents while still refusing to tax the super rich. And we need pro-migrant rhetoric right now, but what we're getting from Keir Starmer is the complete opposite. So I get why people are disillusioned. But reform is not the answer. They're not some sort of anti-establishment party. They literally are the establishment. The only thing Nigel Farage and his mates are interested in is more money and more power for themselves and for oil and gas giants.
Do you think the continued argument around the Chagos Islands reopens that same nostalgic, patriotic... I have to say, I've been taken by surprise. I see a lot of people performing a sort of rending of garments who I am quite confident couldn't put a pin on a map within 10,000 miles of where the Chagos Islands are 6 months ago. And I wonder why
Are you talking about Priti Patel?
No, I think Priti Patel would have known. She probably has business interests there. But like the 20-something Guido and think tank alumni who seem to be on a rotation now to the Telegraph and the Spectator and GB News, and there just seems to be this group of young men, all of whom seem to lock onto the same story at the same time, magically.
Well, it's almost like it's our fentanyl. Like when you were talking earlier, Rachel, I was reminded that I went looking for a documentary or information about the fentanyl crisis for something I was researching. And so YouTube went, she wants this. And it kept feeding me stories, heartbreaking stories. It's usually parent to camera or loved one to camera talking about their child, usually born somewhere between 2000 and 2008, who is now dead, and how they fell into the fentanyl trap. Yeah. Often very middle-class parents talking about a white blonde girl who has fallen victim to it, having been introduced by a boyfriend or following a car crash where they were injured and they then get hooked on it, whatever, right? And it is incredibly subliminal pro-Trump messaging. And I fully believe that a lot of the documentary makers producing this stuff are Trump sympathetic, probably funded by the very same people putting cash behind his political campaign. And we've talked about this on the show before, about the incredibly clever informational space. And then occasionally they'll throw in one of an interview with somebody who then says, but, I don't agree that, we can blame migrants wholly for the fentanyl crisis. And I think it's so it's that thing again of going, look, we aren't biased. You can't accuse us of being pro one side because we also give you very, very occasionally the other side. And I've seen it today with the Chagos stuff that it's the same people popping up saying, so you'll take the winter fuel allowance away from pensioners, but on the other hand, you're taking all that cash from selling off the Chagos Islands. They're weaving together anything and everything they can to poison the well against the government that we've got at the moment. For right or wrong, as Rachel says, they could be fixing
Let's remember that Tufton Street started Chagos, didn't it? That was one of Liz Truss's instructions to Cleverly, if I recall correctly, that this whole kind of
negotiation started, And the main negotiator, some people may not know this, but the main negotiator of the Chagos agreement is Lord Frost's wife.
Yeah.
By the way, Chris McGreal, The Guardian's Chris McGreal, wrote an incredible book about the opioid crisis. I think it's called American Overdose. And that just explains the actual story, the absolute collapse of a state that in every single way imaginable from every aspect failed to protect citizens, people from this crisis. And it really is just heartbreaking and devastating, like how at every point where it was possible for the state to mitigate, it instead sided with money. And I think that's the story writ large, that with every single subject that we're looking at, whatever level it's on, climate emergency and insulating homes, it's about the state protecting capital and finding ways to divert attention from the culprits, the reasons that we have these multi-level crises. It's not immigration, it's not, all these things that are part of the culture war. It is precisely the state propping up
the billionaire class
that keeps, siphoning away resources from the rest of us. And all of this is just a giant diversion tactic.
Well, I think we need a call to action. We started with Brussels, we ended up with fentanyl in this section. But I wonder if the call to action is to read the book that you just mentioned, and we'll drop a link to our bookshop where you'll be able to get a copy.
Quiet Riot.
O'Reilly! You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts. Quiet Riot.
We may have to resurrect a previous regular feature. You got to troll with it sometime soon, because I don't know if it's the same for you, Alex, but as pro-Europeanism is rising back up the agenda, so too are the hate comments rushing up.
The blue tips have been busy.
They have. But for now, it is time for our weekly giggle. It is time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
Alex, hit me.
What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, Juliet famously muses. Well, Sir Gavin Williamson disagrees. He was livid that the name of a submarine being built was changed from HMS Agincourt,
of course he was,
which he announced in 2018 before being sacked as Defence Secretary, to HMS Achilles, reportedly to avoid causing unnecessary offence to the French. He called it woke and pathetic. Now, guess which other former Tory party big hitter waded into this? Who do you think should be the most relaxed about adopting whatever name helps in whatever situation? Any guesses, anyone?
Not great shouts, then.
It is.
There you go.
It is
He normally sticks to airplanes,
Michael
not
Green,
boats.
Sebastian Fox and Corinne Stockheath himself. He also thought it was awful to change name. It's like, have you sacked your PR people? I don't know why the name changed, of course, but I would hazard a guess that the Entente Cordiale, having come as close to collapsing as it has in decades, when a couple of years ago the UK basically gazumped France in the AUKUS deal to manufacture submarines, someone took a fresh look at the slate of names and decided that perhaps unveiling a fleet of them called HMS Agincourt, HMS Waterloo, HMS Brexit, and HMS Your Wine is Overrated was maybe unnecessarily indelicate. But there is a twist to this tale.
Go on.
Because the BBC Today reports that it was in fact the king who intervened to change the name, and that it was while Shapps was Defence Secretary. So this week, it is the king that is woke.
That's peak. That
is
peak in the woke story,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Alex, and listeners. Don't forget to send your instances of wokery to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
Quiet Riot.
White-presenting Jewish people can be aware of having the privileges of whiteness, but also know that holding privilege while Jewish is precisely what sets off white nationalists' antisemitism. Jews need to be able to show up as both white and not white. Those are the words of today's guest, Rachel Shabi, in her new book, Off-White. She concludes in that section, we need the capacity within progressive movements to hold this contradiction. We need to create enough cognitive, political, and emotional space to embrace all of it. Now, I could not help but think that this, while specific in its context, it really could apply to any complex issue and difficult debate going on at the moment. In fact, it could be this podcast's mission statement. But complexity takes time, and it takes quiet, and it takes good faith. So it is as horrific, I think, as it is timely to be talking to Rachel the day after Trump's incendiary statements advocating, and on this I shan't mince words as so many of the media seem to be doing, he's advocating ethnic cleansing. A few of you complain every time I use a clip of Trump rather than read his words or sum them up. You don't want him in your ears. I get that. But these are not words I care to read or sum up, nor are they words anyone should look away from. So with no apology, it is vital to document the unvarnished fact of what he said. Here it is.
It would be my hope that we could do something really nice, really good, where they wouldn't want to return. Why would they want to return? The place has been hell. It's been one of the meanest, toughest places on earth. And nobody can live there. You can't live there. So if we can build them through massive amounts of money supplied by other people, very rich nations, if we can build something for them in one of the countries, and it could be Jordan, and it could be Egypt, it could be other countries, and you could build 4 or 5 or 6 areas. It doesn't have to be one area, but you take certain areas and you build really good quality housing, like a beautiful town, like someplace where they can live and not die, because Gaza is a guarantee that they're going to end up dying. The same thing's going to happen again. It's happened over and over again, and it's going to happen again as sure as you're standing there, Peter. I hope that we could do something where they wouldn't want to go back. Who would want to go back? They've experienced nothing but death and destruction.
Rachel, I have seen a host of analysts trying to glean the motives behind Trump's words. Is there any value to that? Does it matter whether this is some sort of opening bid to strong-arm people into a position, or whether he means it ultimately?
I don't think there's much value in second-guessing a chaos merchant who likes to throw chaotic statements and edicts into the common space precisely for the purpose of sowing chaos. I don't think there's any point either in trying to pretend this is some kind of strategic opening gambit. Yeah. What we can say for sure, however, is that Trump, with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visiting, by the way, for whom a war crimes warrant is out for his arrest.
Yeah, the US are not signatories to the Rome Convention. I checked because I thought, how is he traveling there? The US, weirdly, despite having negotiated the ICC remit and the convention that sets it up, did not then sign up to it.
The US has been underminer-in-chief of the ICC next to Bibi himself, next to the Israeli Prime Minister himself, in terms of undermining the work of the ICC.
I mean, and Russia and China, obviously, and loads
on this specific issue. But the very idea of Trump, with Netanyahu sitting next to him, saying, well, Gaza is like unlivable. You know, why would you want to live there? It's been bombed. Everything's awful. And he's sitting next to the guy who bombed it. And he's the president of the country that facilitated that bankrolled it, that provided the weapons and the diplomatic cover for 15 months to do it, is such a new level of gaslighting about what actually the causes of that are. And what we can say is that when Trump does that, he shifts the window of permissibility in the same way that the 15 months of war, which now several organizations and experts on genocide around the world have described as a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, it's shifting the sphere of permissibility. It means that, Israeli media can, in the last few days now, be having these conversations of, is it possible? How would we do it? What would it mean? How would it work? It means that the international media can start chattering, like, is it possible? Who would take them? What would we do? Of course it's not possible.
The same people talking about a two-state solution not a week ago, now basically going, what about no state? What about no? I mean, it's just incredible.
But the idea that we should entertain the prospect of, well, sure, let's just move these people around. They can't go back to Gaza. Let's just move them around. It's like, do you believe in international law or do you not? If you want to move people around, great. Let's say we can do that for everyone. You would never say that about Ukraine. Never in a million years would you say that if Putin suggested it. And so the fact that Palestinians, after going through this genocidal war for 15 months, now have to countenance a media environment where, you know, the president of the most powerful country in the world that has bankrolled and given diplomatic cover for Israel is now saying this. It does just move a window in some way and give Netanyahu more wiggle room.
Quiet Riot.
Now, listeners, I beg your indulgence. This is a long episode, and it's a long episode for two reasons. The first is that these are complicated, difficult, messy conversations, but we do need to have them. The second reason is that after we'd recorded late on Wednesday night, I received the most incredible dispatch from our regular collaborator, Arthur Snell, who is in Israel right now and woke up to the news of Trump making these incredible statements. I felt I had to include it in full.
Hello, quiet rioters. I woke up this morning, as it happens, just over 30 miles from the Gaza Strip. So it was quite something for the first piece of news I saw to be the announcement by President Trump of the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, followed by an American colonial occupation. As somebody who spent quite a lot of his younger years serving in the Middle East in the post-9/11 wars, places like Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, the very idea that America thinks that it could gain from occupying Gaza, ethnically cleansing the population, and then turning it into a sort of monster Las Vegas. It's such a mind-boggling idea, it's impossible really to get your head around it. But the difficulty is, as with all of Trump's crazy ideas, the thing you can't do is dismiss it and say, oh, he's not being serious. I think one of the big learning points of the Trump second presidency is he's deadly serious. He's deadly serious about Greenland, about the Panama Canal, about threatening tariffs, and about ethnically cleansing and occupying Gaza. I spent the last couple of days in Israel doing some work really that had nothing to do with Israel, but it gave me an opportunity to travel a little bit around the country. I was in Jerusalem on Sunday, unusually quiet. Obviously, normally the old city of Jerusalem is thronged with tourists, but there's hardly anyone around given the current situation. But you still see the underlying tension that's there in the air. A city where every individual property is a subject of dispute, where Israeli settlement takes the form of an ancient house in a certain part of the city being acquired by some other entity. From Jerusalem, I found myself in Haifa. Some people talk of Haifa as a case study of coexistence. It's certainly true that it has a history of a fairly balanced, multi-faith and multi-ethnic population, and it's one where the tensions that you see in places like Jerusalem are far less in evidence. On the drive back from Haifa, we were coming into Tel Aviv in the rush hour traffic, and there were two immense billboards down the side of huge skyscrapers, probably 100 foot high or bigger, both with massive images of Donald Trump. In one of them, he's shaking hands with MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and the slogan underneath is urging that Israel would make a peace deal with the Saudis. And this is, as I was told by the person I was with, is actually sponsored by a right-wing Israeli organisation. It just seems so extraordinary to imagine that the topsy-turvy world we now inhabit sees right-wing Israelis urging peace deals between Israel and Arab countries. In the second image, Donald Trump is associated with bringing the hostages home. Of course, some have been released, but there remain many still in captivity. Something that struck me as cruelly ironic about that hostage release campaign, which of course any reasonable person would hope to see, was that Trump's latest statements on Gaza must spell doom for the chances of hostages being released in the short term. Why would Hamas release hostages at the point that they're being told that Gaza is going to be cleared out and turned into an American colony? So then that leaves us the question of, well, why did Trump do this? Because he took a lot of credit for the hostage releases. And we have to recall that he was speaking as Bibi Netanyahu visited him at the White House, the first foreign leader to do so in this new presidency. And I think what's interesting about that, it's a reminder of how suggestible Trump is. People recall the way that he seemed to be putty in Putin's hands at their famous meeting during the first Trump presidency. And then during this presidency, he meets Bibi Netanyahu, and the first thing he talks about is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. By sabotaging the hostage negotiations, and no doubt by prolonging the uncertainty around the conflict, that gives Bibi a stay of execution. As everybody knows, the moment the conflict can be seen to have ended, Bibi faces the Israeli public and will be forced to face up to the fact that October the 7th happened on his watch. Of course, if Bibi can keep the thing rolling, he gets to continue to be Prime Minister. Trump doesn't have the ability to understand the implications of these sorts of calculations, just as he didn't have the ability to understand the way he was being manipulated by Putin. So him announcing a real estate deal for Gaza is easy. He thinks in terms of real estate deals, that's his world. But what this means for the region, for the hostages, and also for radicalization, something that people perhaps don't talk about as much. But if you wanted to create a new armed insurgency in the Middle East, one way to go about it would be by starting an American colony in Gaza, which was a kind of casino Las Vegas. These are very strange times indeed. Well, that's all from me. Thanks for listening, Quiet Rioters.
Look, we were all worried that the ceasefire, while extremely welcome, was incredibly delicate. Where do we think the ceasefire stands in light of this ridiculous...
Well, this is one of the issues. And I look at the consequences of saying this stuff. What might it do to the idea that even temporarily displacing people to rebuild? I mean, people in Gaza right now will think, rightly so, if we leave, we ain't never coming back.
Yeah.
Right? So this will have the opposite effect. It will harden attitudes there. They will think we're being hoodwinked here. What are the chances of the ceasefire surviving this?
Well, I'm not sure about the chances for that ceasefire.
Unless they've done a deal behind the scenes with the leadership, you see.
Certainly until the point where the Israelis have got most of their hostages back, I think it likely will hold. But there's a wider problem here, which is absolutely Israel made Gaza unlivable. It is just wiped, completely wiped. Everything that you would need to live a life in Gaza has been collapsed into rubble. Trump is saying something which is a plan, which is horrendous, which is ethnic cleansing. What's everyone else saying? What are the rest of the global leaders who watched this happen week after week, month after month, and knew that it would lead to Gaza being uninhabitable? Where the hell are they? Where are their ideas? What's their plan? You know, and the only reason that people have any bandwidth to discuss the Trump plan, horrendous though it is and ethnic cleansing though it categorically is that all the people who actually facilitated this genocide, who knew full well it would end up here, with 2 million Gazans going, what do we do now? And certainly things going to get worse in terms of disease and just dealing with the hell of what's happened. Everybody who facilitated that knew full well it would end up here and had no plan. So that's the bit that we need to reckon with and be angry about as well.
So Starmer was challenged at PMQs about this.
I have, from the last few weeks, two images fixed in my mind. The first is the image of Emily Damari reunited with her mother, which I found extremely moving. The second was the image of thousands of Palestinians literally walking through the rubble to try to find their homes and their communities in Gaza. They must be allowed home. They must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild on the way to a two-state solution.
So what he's doing there is he's not engaging at all with what Trump said. He's restating the UK position. And that leaves me in a weird place because there's part of me that thinks it's a cop-out. But there's also part of me that thinks, if you do look at Trump as a sort of chaos merchant, that there is actually some strength in restating our position remains this. I'm not going to engage with exchanging insults with someone, basically, who wants to create this back and forth.
Yeah, but there's a difference between trading insults and just saying categorically we reject outright any proposal that involves the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. Right? He could do that. So the question is, why wouldn't he?
Does it serve anyone to alienate Donald Trump? Will that make life better for Palestinians?
Does it serve Palestinians to be the Prime Minister of Britain and say, actually, yeah, I respect international law when it comes to Israel-Palestine?
Well, no, but he said that. No, he said that.
No, but
that is what he said.
You can't just say that and then not translate it into the reality of what it means today. The UK has consistently flouted its own position on international law when it comes to Israel-Palestine. That much is clear.
Yeah.
Quiet riot. Quiet riot.
Rachel, in your book, Off-White, and listeners, there will be a link in the show notes, you talk about the weaponization of anti-Semitism by the right wing to silence political opponents. But it's those same people who have opened the door to more anti-Semitism. Alex, you've got a beautiful voice. You read the quote.
The most powerful men in the world capitalized on foghorning all the festering prejudices that people previously at least had the good sense not to express out loud. Inevitably, when the social guardrails around racism came off, anti-Semitism slipped in. I saw a recent interview with you, and you were saying that this is precisely the crux of it, of presenting anti-Semitism and anti-racism as two opposing things, or at least competing things on a scale of priorities, that is the trick, as it were, at the center of it, the misdirection at the center of it. And if you begin to see them both as one thing, then it becomes entirely possible to, for instance, condemn Israel's behavior in Gaza without going into all those difficult areas, because it is all about the oppression of minority groups.
Yeah, I think you put it really well. And by the way, Naomi, I think you have a lovely speaking voice as well, just to get that in. That's one of the main reasons that has made this issue so hard in this moment, for progressives and for anti-racists, that if you're constantly hearing that anti-Semitism is defined as the way that Israel and its right-wing supporters define it, which is the UN is anti-Semitic, the BBC is anti-Semitic, climate campaigners, anyone who is critical of Israel's policies, anyone who talks about the Israeli military occupation of Palestinians or a system that leading human rights organizations, including Israeli ones, have categorized as apartheid, and right up to and including this genocidal war, anyone critical of that is anti-Semitic. What effectively that means is that fighting anti-Semitism doesn't look like fighting a form of racism. It actually looks like producing a form of racism or reproducing a form of racism against Palestinians, right? And so that's, I think, is what has happened in practice with the way this conversation is playing out. But more widely, the book looks at all the different elements that have contributed to this conversation being so gnarled up and toxic and unhelpful, and actually producing less clarity and understanding of anti-Semitism. And some of it is exactly what you just described. Some of it is to do with things that the progressive left camp are not quite engaging with or understanding, or could have more clarity about how anti-Semitism and challenging it is part of anti-racist work. Part of it is to do with how we talk about Israel-Palestine. Part of it is to do with the far right and the way that they are using both anti-Semitism and the pretend fight against it.
And a big part of it is about social media, which have reduced all debate to these very big statements, very big, clear, short statements about everything that don't suit this kind of debate, right?
I think that's absolutely true, and we could apply that to lots of other issues as you do in the show. And at the same time, I think there is it's not social media driving this narrative. The way the conversation about anti-Semitism is playing out is primarily in a sort of mainstream political and media interpretation of it. Yeah. And that's what's been so spectacularly unhelpful and actually has divided people who should be united as anti-racists.
Is part of it down to the fact that, Israel has had really a very hard right-wing government since the 70s, with very few windows in there when it was out of power. So in many ways, Israel has become almost synonymous with right-wing Israel, if that makes sense. People are unable to see that maybe not everyone supports what Netanyahu is doing. Do you know what I mean? It encourages people to see it as homogeneous and monochromatic. And through that, Israel has struck some quite strange friendships. You touch on this in the book, with Orban. And only last week we were saying how weird it was to see Netanyahu tweet support for Elon Musk doing a fucking Nazi salute. And you think, what is happening? Am I having some kind of fever hallucination?
If only. So I think the wider issue that you're talking about, though, is that the far right making friends with Netanyahu, and it's a mutual thing, is to do with...
Because it whitewashes their anti-Semitism as well, right?
Yeah.
They can say, how can I be a Nazi? I'm mates with Israel.
Which is what they effectively are saying. That's the sort of subtweet of a lot of their communications. And the reason that's happening is Israel has looked at the international stage, especially at the EU level. It's looked at, there was a period when it looked around and saw the EU being very critical of, say, the separation wall, which was declared illegal, which cuts off big chunks of Palestinian land and sometimes separates families from themselves, never mind also their land, or very critical of the continued military occupation of Palestinians, or very critical of the fact that settlement goods are arriving into the EU labelled as Israeli when these settlements are illegal under international law. And so Netanyahu looked around just at the time when lots of new countries were joining the EU, like Hungary, and thought, wait, if I befriend them, they will be useful to me on the international stage.
I have a voice at that table.
And that's exactly what happened. They consistently and routinely block anything meaningful that the EU might do about Israel, up to and including recently in criticism of Israel's policies in Gaza and calling for a ceasefire. Yeah. And of course, these far-right leaders in return get, just as you said, Alex, they get this political rehabilitation. These far-right parties with histories of anti-Semitism and current anti-Semitism, in the case of Viktor Orban in Hungary and his nakedly anti-Semitic election campaign involving demonizing the Jewish philanthropist George Soros, and a whole bunch of weird Holocaust revisionism that they're all engaged in, Hungary, Poland, Austria. They get to...
You get a lot of stuff about Soros at the moment, don't you, love?
Oh, I'm sure you do. But so they get to...
He gave some money to Best for Britain like 6 years ago.
The Open Society Foundation gave us the money. UK arm of the Open Society.
But it's now the response to literally her every tweet.
Yeah, and we've had to fight with Google to get anti-Semitic videos taken down of my face morphing into George's face and all of that stuff. Yeah,
delightful.
I want to ask you, Rachel, about multiple identities and identity politics in the round, which is something I've always instinctively struggled with and sort of railed against, and the key of how to approach it, I'm sure that chimes with your own multi-layered identity. In the book, you describe, for example, experience of several Black Jewish progressive women. It is as though people expect you to pick a side of your identity. It often feels impossible to contain all these contradictions around Jewish identity within progressive spaces. Navigating the subject of Jews and whiteness is confounding because several conflicting things are true at the same time. Most Jewish people are mostly treated as white, but until recently were not white, benefit from whiteness aside from Jews of colour, and uphold racism, but also experience prejudice and discrimination. And we crave certainty. That craving for certainty, is it something we should fight or lean into and use?
I think we should fight it. I think, the realities are messy and the conversations that we're going to have are messy. And it takes time. That's the thing. It takes time and a lot of trust and the building of trust. That means not automatically assuming bad faith. And the trouble is that we are required to have these conversations with each other in the midst of a political and media conversation that is obnoxious and harmful and divisive, and particularly uses the issue of anti-Semitism in a particular way that is peak divide and rule vibes, by the way. And we have to navigate it despite that and while that is going on all around us. And that's another layer of difficulty.
At a point of crisis.
Yes,
which is the worst possible, So,
exactly.
So I found that around October the 7th, there was no point in trying to be nuanced or discuss this in any rational way because there was just too much hurt and anger from every side, right? And what that did to me is it made me quiet.
Yeah.
And what making me quiet did, weirdly, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but for a while I disengaged. Actually, from the whole thing. I didn't want to see news. And the same thing happened to me around the issue of trans rights. And it took an effort to kind of read back into it and started saying things about it. Because that's what it does. You think, do I want my timeline and my life to be taken up for the next 10 days by people who are telling me to die in various creative ways? No. So I'll say nothing. And by saying nothing, because I think our instinct is to consume these things and react to them. So if you can't react to them, you stop consuming them. It makes us disengage from the issue.
Yeah, I think you raised something that is so true more widely and definitely true with this subject, in that it is such a convoluted mess of a conversation in the way that the political and media mainstream have been having it, that actually what on earth is the uninvolved onlooker supposed to make? You're like, I don't know what to make of this. I would like to be an anti-racist, but actually I don't know what the hell is going on here. And several people I interviewed for the book said, well, I also don't want to ask any questions because what if my questions get misconstrued as anti-Semitism? What that has meant with the space of anti-Semitism is that the end result is that it has become perceived as a right-wing thing. And certainly the way that claims of it are used to deflect criticism of Israel, it falls into that category. And what that means is that also the left is not in that space.
Yeah.
So the left will talk about anti-Semitism as in, of course we aren't, because it needs to protect people who are facing material, real, devastating consequences of fake accusations of anti-Semitism, not least Palestinians who need to describe their own experiences of Israel as settler colonialism without being accused of anti-Semitism, but also people are losing like jobs and reputations and, all the rest of it. People have to defend, but that can't be all that we're doing. And that does end up being the sum total of what the progressive left says about anti-Semitism, of that's a false accusation. And by the way, most of it is coming from the far right. Now, those two things might be true, but in and of themselves, they're not enough to get us to an understanding of how we reconnect anti-Semitism and the fight against it to our anti-racism. It's not even close. So there's a big gap there in the work that we could be doing to reclaim that space.
In your lifetime, has the world moved to a better place when it comes to anti-Semitism, or do you not see that needle moving at all since you were born?
That's such an interesting question. I'm not sure how to answer it. Primarily, my personal experience, my family's Iraqi. I spent my first few years in Israel. When I was growing up in the UK, I look back now with that lens of understanding racism that older me has. And I look back and I'm looking and thinking, was that anti-Semitism or was that because we're Arabs and Iraqis? Like, I actually don't know what it is that was annoying you. For sure, members of my family experienced anti-Semitism in the UK, but I'm not sure what in that jumbled up animosity was going on. But I didn't have the upbringing where many Jewish people in the UK do, and in the US, where you're growing up in the diaspora and your identity as a Jewish person is just bound up with being supportive of Israel, to the extent that criticism of Israel is seen as criticism of your identity. I personally don't have that experience, being born in Israel, but not having that association, because it wasn't what constructed my identity as a British, Israeli, Iraqi. And so, but I think that's
maybe that's also the answer, right? That notion of having, that we all have multiple identities.
Yeah.
Maybe in that is the seed of how to talk about this stuff, because it is difficult. I feel really weird every time I experience racism because I'm white. And I don't know whether to share it or, but to the person shouting at me in the street, P word, go home, it doesn't matter that I'm Greek, right? And I experienced that fully. And ironically, I experienced it in Athens as well as here. People shout at me to go home. So, but
where to Mykonos or to
back to Pakistan, I imagine.
Pakistan again.
But it's such a weird thing. It's just such a jumble of stuff, basically, that is very hard to untangle.
But I think the important bit, and that's the bit that I think is really useful for anti-racists, is, okay, but the origin story of racism is always Christian Europe, right? That's the genesis,
actually, it's ancient Greece, but...
Well, whether we're talking about...
I'm working on that at the moment.
Whether we're talking about anti-Semitism, whether we're talking about the anti-black racism that was invented to... or like race that was invented to enslave and colonize, they've bounced between each other. They're like sharing the same racism spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Right? And I think once we understand the origin story of anti-Semitism is understood as deeply embedded in Christian European societies, which I think we are generally quite low information on, in the same way that we're low information about all racism. That will actually take us quite some way to reconnecting the anti-racist struggle so that it actually takes care of everyone and includes everyone who is having the experience of being a racialized minority. And that experience will look different. As you articulate, it will look different in different contexts and at different times.
Okay, so to round this off, my central reservation about the book, I say this as a really good thing, right? I encourage every listener to buy it because it's not only an exceptionally human and clear explanation of this really difficult terrain, but it's actually really, really good to read. It's very readable. But my reservation is this. It provides a host of really good arguments against the common tropes and misconceptions being advanced, but it assumes in a way that they are advanced in good faith, that this could be solved by debate, that by having better arguments we can advance this, rather than dismantling the interests that are pumping money into keeping hate going. So I guess I'm asking, are you going to do a follow-up? Or are you genuinely of the view, because I know also that you have, the uplifting ending to the book is that you have met, through researching the book, loads and loads of people that are actually out there doing the real life work on this. So what is the answer? Is it to effectively abandon the gratification of the social media argument and just go out there and find an organization to support or someone to volunteer with? Or
I do think the answer to a lot of the questions that we're asking more widely about our politics is go community level and have long offline conversations. I do think that's an answer to a lot of things. Part of the reason that I wrote this book is that, exactly as you're saying and exactly as Naomi has experienced with the whole Soros thing, the way that anti-Semitism is being used by the far right, both the actual anti-Semitism of the Soros-hating Great Replacement theory, also Christian Zionism, which is real and rapidly coalescing far-right groups globally, and the fake pretend we care about anti-Semitism, we can't be anti-Semites because we love Israel, which is absolutely bogus. Both those mechanisms are serving the far right very well and helping their political advancement. And so part of the reason that I think we should be engaging as the progressive left with anti-Semitism and challenging it is not just so that we can be morally coherent in our anti-racism and build a wider tent, but also because there's a very real threat globally.
And it kind of pulls
to
the
everyone.
curtain back.
Exactly, which is always a good idea because anti-Semitism is essentially a conspiracy about power. So pulling back the curtain on that, the actual source of power, I think that's just going to make our struggle against all of the far-right resurgence that we're seeing that much more powerful.
Rachel, it's the custom to give the second call to action to our guest. So would you like to recommend a charity or an organization or something that's doing good work at the moment?
Yeah, I think an organization that's been doing incredible work in the devastation of what's happening in Gaza is Medical Aid for Palestinians. I would really recommend checking them out and seeing the work that they do and donate if you can.
Very good. So we'll drop that link in the show notes, and we'll also drop a link to Rachel's book in the show notes. And we now have a bookshop.org page where we can put all our guests' books in.
Fancy.
And that is something that basically gives us a couple of pennies every time you buy a book, but also direct some of the funds to a local, actual, physical bookshop.
We like that.
So you order it there, but it's a local bookshop that sends the book out to you, which I think is really quite lovely, actually. So we'll drop a link.
That one, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll drop a link for that. Now, it's time for a little bit of good news, and boy, do we need it. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. Do-de-o-do-lo-do-de-o-do-lo-do. I want good news.
What have you got for us, Naomi?
Well, I'm acutely aware.
I love that Rachel has really been enjoying our puns. She's sort of quiet.
I mean, it's enjoy the word.
Yes.
I enjoy the effort of the puns.
Definitely a word.
Over at the University of Montreal, researchers have figured out how to use what I must say are very cute woolen hats to scan the brain of a cat while they're awake.
Oh my God, I've seen the little things with the wires going in.
Right. Now, I hear you ask, is this the start of our ability to communicate with cats? Are we about to be able to read their minds, know what they want for supper? No. But what these little fluffy hats have enabled the Canadian scientists to do is identify the part of their brain responsible for chronic pain, allowing for more automated detection of chronic pain in the future for, one imagines, both cats and potentially humans. The brain is a mystery. We know very, very little about it. And this latest foray into the kind of telepathic is an exciting step towards scientific understanding of the brain. And who knows, maybe in 10 years' time, your cat will be able to tell you exactly which kind of fish it would like for supper. But in the meantime, we're going to drop a link in the show notes to the story, and you get to look at the little cute pictures of the cats. And hopefully we are now alleviating some chronic pain in the feline species.
I have to tell you, I've got two cats. They're brothers. And one of them I would genuinely love to know what goes on in his little head. Because A, he's an evil mastermind, and B, he gets obsessed with a random thing every week. Like 1 week he will be like going up on the shelves and stealing cherry tomatoes. That'll be his obsession for a week. And then the next week he started nicking the bath plug and actually moving it to some other part of the house.
Setting himself a challenge every week.
Genuinely, that cat is an evil genius. The other one, I don't need any kind of woolly hat to know what he's thinking. He's the dumbest creature on God's green earth.
Aww.
He's literally just, pet me, give me biscuits, now pet me again.
And with that, we draw this week's show to an end. Our enormous thanks to Rachel Shabi for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me on.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in at home. We are very grateful for your ears and even more grateful for your backing. And can I give a special shout out to Amy, who wrote in to apologize for having to cancel her subscription because she's having a baby.
Oh, congratulations, Amy.
To which I say, Amy, we love you. And the whole point of our model is that you will keep getting this podcast for free at the same time as everyone else, and someone else will pick up the slack. So if you're in a position to help, please do head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and sign up for as little as $5. Do it for Amy.
And let us know, Amy, whether you have a little Alex or a tiny little Naomi as well.
And we want baby pics soon, please. Good luck, good luck, good luck. And everybody else, if you can't afford to give us money, you can still rate us, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, and become our advocate, spreading the Quiet Riot mind virus to your friends and family. We'll be back on Sunday, but for now, it's farewell from me.
And from me, lots of love. We love you. Bye.
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 Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou, and produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu, and edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
I am acutely aware that I've done more than one good news canine story. So I thought I'd dig out a feline one for
yes,
Alex and Kenny and Nigella and all the other cat people we've had on the show.
Power.
Over at the University of Montreal, researchers have figured out how to use what I must say are incredibly cute woolen
Do you want
hats.
to redo that so we don't have Kenny's pussy power?
Maybe.
Do you want to do a clean version of that? And I think, Alex, if you're listening, I think we have the blooper for the end.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my side softer?
Can I make my side firmer? Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. And now save 50% on the new Sleep Number limited edition smart bed. Plus free home delivery when you add a base. Ends Monday. Exclusively at a Sleep Number store near you. Learn more at sleepnumber.com.